have the availability of handguns in some way afforded people disempowered independence because of their availability?
I think in some instances it may, because if they're of sound body and mind and they're able to take care of themselves and protect themselves, then certainly.
Yeah. So can we have the mic passed to her?
Article for one of my classes that went along with that sort of train of thought, and there are mainly like two ways of which things like occur. You either have it happen by force or it's by choice, and guns allow people to do this by choice, because if I'm not very tall, I'm not muscular, but if I'm being attacked by someone twice my size and I have a gun, I'm on the same playing field as them, versus without that protection, I'm a lot less, I'm more helpless. So I don't know, in that sense, I think it's more beneficial to be able to defend yourself in that light.
Actually, statistics are showing the complete opposite, that having a gun within the home is not empowering. Actually, it only is to hurt yourself. It does not significantly make a difference when being armed by with it. And I'm glad for statistics for you. I'm pulling it up right now.
Share the mic with her.
I think this issue touches on whether or not we should be allowed to use high-capacity magazines. High-capacity magazines make sense for criminals. Or let me rephrase that. Should criminals be able to use high-capacity magazines? No. But should Granny be able to have more than 10 shots? She may not be a very good shot. Does limiting the number of bullets she can use to protect herself make sense?
We did have a point of clarification, so I'm going to ask you to pass the mic to Jason Springer. And one of the questions was just a clarification about who can buy a gun at a gun show.
Yeah, I'm glad I got this question, because I think there are a lot of misconceptions about what a gun show is and what happens at a gun show. So a gun show is essentially a flea market where guns are bought, sold, traded. You can buy ammunition, you can buy accessories, etc. The people essentially selling firearms, in my experience, and I've probably been to 2 or 3 dozen gun shows in the state of North Carolina over the last 20 years or so, my general experience has been is that at those gun shows, federally licensed dealers sell a significant portion, I would say certainly the majority of firearms, again, at the gun shows that I've been to, and each of those guns must undergo a background check when it's sold through a federally licensed dealer. Now, if we're talking about private sales are an option at a gun show. They're an option at in the parking lot of the Walmart here in Burlington. I mean, you have the option to sell your firearms privately in the state of North Carolina. Long guns are not subject in those private sales to background checks. Now, an individual may morally decide, I'm not selling this firearm, this long gun, this rifle or shotgun, to someone who doesn't produce a concealed handgun permit that would assure me that you've passed a background check in the past, or provide me with a concealed handgun permit that would show me that you've passed a background check in your recent history. But that is not required. That for a long gun, you do not have to have a background check for that private sale, that person-to-person sale. Now, North Carolina Statute 14402 tells me that if I, as a private citizen, want to sell you a handgun, I'm required by state law to ask you or to basically require that you provide me one of those 2 pieces of documentation, your concealed handgun permit, again, which assures me you've been through a background check, or a pistol purchase permit that's been issued by the sheriff in the county where you reside. in addition to verifying your identification. So I hope that provides some clarification. So in sum, dealers' sales to private individuals all undergo background checks. Handgun sales, all handgun sales in the state of North Carolina are required to undergo background check. The process is slightly different, whether it's a dealer sale or a private sale. Now, policing that, I'm sure, is a bit of a nightmare, as it would be with the legislation that just failed. But that is the current law. Long guns are what I would consider to be, or I'm not going to say I'm going to consider it to be anything. Some consider it to be the loophole that exists in North Carolina state law.
Thank you, Jason. We have several questions about guns in schools. So I'm asking for people's opinion on the presence of guns in schools, and then the observation that some jurisdictions have moved police substations into elementary schools. What are your thoughts on this as a way to keep children safe at school?
I know with the city of Burlington, we put SROs in some of our schools here, and I think that's a deterrent. Sometimes it may be, sometimes it may not be, because with the instance in Connecticut, you know, this guy knew the school system. He knew where everybody was being placed in the system. So he had every opportunity to come in and start wherever he wanted to start. But I think when you have an SRO officer in the schools, it deters them, because they never know where that SRO officer is going to be at that time once he comes in there. So with the SRO making rounds and making sure the kids are safe, and I think when the front office knows who's coming in that school, supposedly, because I think most of the doors are that's the only entrance in. The administration has a way to contact that SRO to let them know that somebody's coming in that may not be of sound mind, that may cause trouble in there. But I think it's a good thing that we are able to provide SROs in our school systems.
Any other comments about that from panelists? And if the audience would like to make a comment, we're happy to walk the mic over.
Okay, so I worked in 3 different high schools, and one of the high schools I worked at, the SRO was involved in racial profiling of students. And so I think many SROs do good work and do contribute to some percentage of the students feeling safer at their school. But I think that it can be a little simplistic to think that an SRO is always a positive influence in the school. I think not all students are going to look at a uniformed police officer as someone who is going to make their school experience safer. We do have a history, and I'm not commenting towards any of the police officers in this room, but there is a history of racial profiling by police in this country, that some communities in our schools will not feel like the presence of more armed officers will make the school a place that they're welcomed in or feel safer.
Dr. Carpenter, could you also address like screening in schools, where, you know, you go through a weapon, a radar kind of system to detect a weapon?
Yeah, so some schools do have metal detectors. I taught in a school that had those.
Are those effective in reducing crime?
So most schools have, you know, upwards of 10 or 15 entrances at high schools where I worked, and typically there's not metal detectors at all 10 or 15 entrances. So all you have to do is coordinate with someone to open a side entrance, and you can easily get a gun into a school.
Professor, I know it's not politically correct to profile, and I appreciate that. But would profiling, you think, prevent violence?
I mean, I can only speak anecdotally. So I have, that officer came into my classroom and wanted to investigate desks, and he named students, saying that student's involved in gang violence, affiliated with gangs, and I want to see tagging on that desk. And I knew that student. I'd worked with that student for many months, and I know that this was completely off base. And again, I'm not, this is anecdotal, okay, so I'm not branding all SROs in that way, but I'm just saying
I
that,
would just like to know what you think aggregately, because you know what the Israeli, Army does in their airport system. And if you're not familiar with that, I would just encourage everyone to go and Google it. Because they do racial profiling. Because there is a profile, of a particular, and I don't have the academics or the formal education plan on it, I don't know. But they are very effective for hitting violence through profiling. My question, because I reject violence. I grew up in violence. I reject racism, bigotry, all that stuff. So that's a given. But my question is, if profiling, be it racial or otherwise, would prevent violence, aggregately speaking, do you think that's something that we should consider?
racial profiling would not prevent school shootings. One of my students in Boston, who was African American, when one of the school shootings happened, said, "What is up with these crazy white kids?" So I do not, I'm not going to comment on racial profiling and its effectiveness, but I do not want it in any school that I work for. And I do not think it would contribute to a more positive school environment in
Well, I'm not addressing
any way.
racial, I'm
Yeah.
addressing profiling in general. And I would love to hear, statistically, if you look at statistics, minorities represent, and I have a lot of minority friends, so this is not a racial issue with me. People that know me know I'm not a racist or a bigot. That's usually what you're branded when you ask these questions, and I'll say this on the floor. But minorities represent, I was an investigator for a year in the public defender's office in the 19th Judicial District in South Florida. They represent about 40% of violent crime. So I'm just asking rationally, because I reject racism and bigotry. But I'm just asking rationally, we're having a rational discussion. If something prevents violence, is it rational not to discuss it? And is it rational not to present it as a solution to stopping violence? And I'll be quiet. Thank you.
And I'll just make one, I'm not going to answer your question, but I'm going to make one final comment related to school environments, that I can also present statistics that show, there's multiple studies that show that minorities in American schools are disproportionately punished for committing the same misbehaviors as non-minorities. So you do the same thing and you get disproportionate punishment based on race in U.S. public schools. I can give you references for studies like that. And I'm going to not talk anymore.
Okay. Thank you. So we had several questions about mental health and the challenges of mental health and civil rights around protecting your mental health record and the need to be able to screen effectively for mental health in the gun permitting and gun sale. And so several questions. I'll just ask one to give you an example. It says, do you believe those with mental illnesses should be able to own a gun? If so, would you suggest mental health screening, and what sort of screening would be effective?
I'll start with an answer. I'm not sure I'd know how to begin a mental health screening that included us all. But it does seem to me that those who have been legally determined to be mentally ill should appear on a registry. And this is an issue of the difference among states. Some states are good at doing that, and many states are very poor at doing that. And I'd like to see more states buy into this notion that a person who's been legally determined to be of unsound mind appears on a registry.
That very topic and exactly what Reverend McBride's talking about is in discussion really as we speak. It was discussed in a committee this morning. It's part of a big debate in the gun legislation that's being tossed around, is trying to get the most effective method to keep the guns out of the hands of those that have some form of mental illness. You have to have a system of being able to identify, who these individuals are, and there are all kind of different methods being used. Fortunately, now technology is beginning to catch up to, some of the issues and giving us some relief. But ultimately, it's going to come down to some sort of a registry that is almost like, and I don't want to, it'll be a record, similar to when you go and check someone's criminal background. They have a criminal record. If someone has an issue or has had issues with mental illness and been part of the system, then that's going to be tracked.
Professor Rich, did you have a?
Yeah, I just wanted to note, though, that while certainly mental health has played a role in a lot of the high-profile shootings that we've heard about recently, it's worth noting that mental health issues are not involved in the vast, vast majority of deaths resulting from gun violence. So while it's great, it would be fantastic if we could have an effective way to keep guns out of the hands of the dangerously mentally ill. It doesn't really solve the majority of the problem that we have.
We have one here, too. Oh, next.
Okay. This is just a comment about the registry. One thing that we need to be careful about is that if we do create a registry, mental health is already a stigmatized identity. So I'm going to compare it to another stigmatized identity, HIV. Yes, there is a registry. When you get diagnosed with HIV, you do need to go to the health department, and you have to put yourself on a list. However, I cannot go and Google that registry and be able to find out who in this room has HIV, because that's for the health department, and then if they need to prosecute as things go on, that's how things need to happen. So if we do make a mental health registry, that needs to be for the appropriate audience, not something for a public venue. That's all.
Agreed. Yeah,
Teresa?
that's exactly the way it's being formulated.
One last question. My brother brought a gun to school when he was 8 years old, not realizing the magnitude of his actions. Do you think the media is desensitizing us to violent weapons? And how do you propose we remedy that?
Well, I agree that we're desensitized to violence. Now, just why that happens, I don't know. But, gone is the day when we could settle a dispute by my slapping you with my glove and challenging you to a duel, one-on-one. We'll never get back to that day. Well, maybe we could, but I don't think that's likely to happen. Violence is the core issue to be resolved, and it's not resolved entirely by legislation. I think churches, synagogues, mosques, all such places of worship have a role to play in helping people manage their violence, manage their violent impulses. I'm going to go ask how much lethality do we need to have surrounding us? I wonder how did we get to the point where what we now call an assault rifle is something that people want to possess? How did that shift happen? That that we now need that kind of weaponry in our hands. What concerns me is the militarization of the family home. Do we all need a rocket-propelled grenade launcher? It would be fun. I wouldn't feel safer in my neighborhood if my neighbors had rocket-propelled grenade launchers. I mean, isn't there a rational limit somewhere? Well, back in 1934, the U.S. Congress decided that gangster guns could be put off limits. There have been a number of attempts since to say this kind of weaponry is not desirable in the community. And I think we've just, every increase in weaponry is something that we individuals want to possess, or many individuals want to possess. I don't see how that makes us safer. I think it does increase our capacity for violence. And I don't know how to put the genie back in the box. Please do.
The whole problem is certain people in this country decided that God didn't belong in the schools anymore. God did not belong in the churches either. And yet you get political rhetoric even out of your church. Why can't we not have God back so that children can learn right from wrong? That's the problem now. They go to school, they're told they can't say the Pledge of Allegiance. They can't say the Lord's Prayer, but yet, what are they learning? No patriotism, no honesty, no moral, no ethics. So
We had
where
a-
did you think you come from?
We have a comment in the back.
I'm an assistant professor here at Carolyn Academy, so this is more from a personal experience. I'm going to try to pull my relation. It just kind of goes to the idea of the SRO, and then also if we take any space from our conversation, we were talking about this idea of sense of community. I actually work at Virginia Tech, I was a full-time doctoral student, and I was in the administrative office the first week of this thing happened for 3 hours and working with families for a couple. And it was really interesting, and I think some of you heard here, we took some time to discuss in class because the anniversary was the day after the Boston Marathon. And I think it didn't even, and I think one of the things us coming together as a community figured out how do we help each other succeed. This is not the gun. And the example of that is, I'm not sure if you are aware, but one of the faculty members at Virginia Tech actually stood in the doorway and one of the students took him off the window and saved him and showed him. And it was interesting, we just talked about how if you have a table or you put in front of a door, how do we respond in this kind of situation? And maybe in a safe setting for our community, understand how to protect them. One of my other colleagues, who's also with the PhD student at Virginia Tech, is she's a women's studies at Allen Community College, and they were talking about actually domestic violence and rape issues and being in rooms and how you can protect yourself. And so if you think about that, when the next time you step into a room in your school, how is it we can how look at this room right now? Can we access, can we get out of these windows? Right?
There are doors behind these, their thing, and the doors are.
You guys take a chair to break
I
the door
suppose-
down. I don't believe that having guns in schools are going to help solve the problem, but if we can come together as a community and understand that we all have our differences, and the fact that it's about how can we keep the I think a lot of it, unfortunately, when we're talking about violence, is extremely
Thank you. It also echoes what CeeLo Fawcett said about, which I heard him saying, we have to figure out how to protect the neighborhood, and then maybe we could move that model larger and then larger. In the back?
I'm Jim Allen. There's been several news articles on me the past couple of years. I'm a guy that walks across Columbia South Side. Something very strange happened during the 2 years that I spent down there. I had a Park Rebel gorilla unload on me with a fully automated machine gun. And I ran up the side of the mountain and I hid behind some plantains
The gun violence panel is winding down, and you're watching a live feed as people gather and chat in McKinnon Hall. We're going to take a quick commercial break.
When we come back, we'll recap some of what you just heard and hear from what students and student experts have to say. Stay with us.
ESTV is partially underwritten by Cancun Mexican Restaurant.
Let's do this.